Okay, Tarek and Tanya,
They're not here.
not here. Well, their PowerPoint went open, so.
I just started
Mhm.
time or student.
I'm actually not sure. I'm just in charge of the Zoom.
Okay.
Honestly, a lot of the sessions are getting over early, so I wouldn't stress too much about it, honestly. Is King and Gasper here? Okay. I really wouldn't worry about time then. It will be great. It's gonna be awesome.
And then I'm also meant to moderate any questions from online. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. I don't think there will be any though, just because it's through YouTube. Can you ask questions through YouTube once in a while?
Yeah, but you can't see them in Zoom, so you don't always have to have multiple screens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly, this is low pressure, low stress. I think I can only open 2 PowerPoints at the same time. I think that's the issue. And Furley, you're first. Okay. Y'all can just see me struggling on this computer.
And I think I have narration on since I recorded it over slideshow, but Shane's now turn that off really quick.
You come help.
Otherwise, it'll like change from like slide to slide, I found, and I don't really want that to happen.
Okay.
Let's see.
Just whenever you're ready.
It's here.
Just make sure Zoom is.
It's slide. Oh, right here. That. Okay, that should work.
Let's make sure you're unmuted.
Right. Oh, yeah, I did not check that.
You're good. You're good. Hey, no worries.
Do I stand here to give it? Is this why the microphone's here? I would imagine.
Let me check and see what you look like. Yes, microphone.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I move around?
Yeah, you have quite a bit of leeway. So this white square is kind of where you have.
Right.
But make sure you speak as loudly as possible.
Do I do some at the microphone too, or? No?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to session 2E, Design and Architecture. Great to see you all this morning. First up, we've got Aidan Furley from Aerospace Engineering with experiments with natural inks and mokuhanga. Take it away.
Hello, I'm Aidan Furley. I'm a freshman at Iowa State University studying aerospace engineering, and this is my presentation on experiments with natural inks and mokuhanga. And the contact information for both myself as well as my faculty mentor can be found on the bottom portion of this slide. Hold on just 1 second. That's not supposed to happen.
Yeah. What did you press?
I pressed this bottom button right
Oh,
here.
it's probably the side.
Oh, that would make sense. So I
Yeah.
pressed it again.
Yep, there you go. Oh.
Okay. So sustainability is important to maintaining the health of our planet. Deriving use from natural materials, whether it's using a mortar and pestle to mash berries or boiling an avocado rind, for example, is one example of a sustainable practice. the method of woodblock printing that we use for this research project. Mokuhinga is the long-used Japanese method for woodblock printing. And this is also a sustainable practice, and I'll get into more exactly why that is later in the presentation. In short, this is an experiment to test the light fastness in natural inks with or without additives paired with certain types of paper. And just for clarity for the rest of this presentation, when I say that something is light fast, I mean that it is resistant to light. Whereas if something is not light fast, it is going to be fugitive or not resistant to light. So a few years ago, my faculty mentor conducted an experiment of her own. She purchased different types of natural ink and mixed them with different additives. And the result of this experiment can be seen on the top right-hand side of this slide right here. We kind of use this as a guide for this semester. We chose ink derived from aromaberry, elderberry, onion ink, madder roots, goldenrod, and black walnut ink. While we're interested in actually making these inks ourselves, the timing of the project beginning in winter made this impossible for us to do that. So instead, we just purchased this ink through Maggie Howe, who is a local resident. The paper that we used for this project came from Awagami and Hironi. We purchased sample packs to ensure that the biggest variance of paper, varying in density, thickness, and actual material, was used. The actual printing process is relatively simple. A couple days before actually printing, I would create a damp pack, which is a collection of wet paper. And then on the actual day of printing, I would need to make the ink more suitable for printing that we have purchased. And in order to do this, I would add rice paste, which acts as a binder, meaning that it helps the ink bind to the material. And I would also add an additive if necessary, if we're working with any additives for that day. I would apply this ink to the wood block, which can be seen to my right on the presentation right there. Taking inspiration from the Japanese method of mokuhinga, I carved the tallest mountain in Japan, which is Mount Fuji. So after applying this ink to the wood block, I would retrieve a piece of wet paper from the damp pack. I would lay it on top of the wood block, and then using a disc bearing, which is a circular tool used in mokuhinga with a handle, I would apply pressure thoroughly on the entire surface of the print to make sure that the ink was pressed into the paper. After doing this, I could peel the paper off and I would have one print done. I could then set this aside, and that would be, I would use the rest of the paper in the damp pack, and then I would be done printing for the day. And drawing this back to sustainability, as opposed to other types of printing, which requires some machinery, this just uses your strength. So this is why this is considered to be a sustainable practice. Now, to actually test the light fastness of these inks, I would take them to a plexiglass square and hang them to the window of the printing studio. And an example of one of those plexiglass squares can be seen in the bottom right-hand corner of that slide right there. And then to actually see how they deteriorate over a number of weeks, I would scan them, and then in this way, I'd be able to see how they deteriorated week after week. Before this experiment even started, I hypothesized that the darker the ink is, the more light fast it would be, meaning it would be more resistant to light. I also hypothesized that the inks printed on the more denser, thicker types of paper would retain pigmentation better. Of course, this wasn't necessarily true, and we'll get into exactly why that is for the remainder of this presentation. So, for our results, we'll look at this first question. How does the light fastness, or how does the material that ink is derived from affect the light fastness of the ink? And on this slide right here, we have the onion ink over a period of 6 weeks. And you can see from that first scan right there, it starts out like a light orange, and then the final scan on the bottom right there, the scan really isn't visible anymore. So this was also observed for similar types of inks derived from fruits and vegetables, which include the aromaberry, elderberry, and of course the onion ink, which is on this slide. And on this next slide right here, we'll look at another category of inks, which are inks derived from nuts and roots. And this includes the goldenrod, the madder roots, and the black walnut. And we can see right here over a progression of 4 weeks, the black walnut, which is pictured on the bottom of the slide right here, does not fade that much. And this, of course, contrasts the information on the last slide, where the onion ink faded relatively quickly. So from these two slides, we can conclude that inks derived from nuts and roots are more light fast, meaning that they're more resistant to light, whereas inks that are derived from fruits and vegetables are not nearly as light fast and fade over a period of time. So we'll look at another question now. How does the inclusion of additives affect the light fastness of the ink? And on this first slide here, we'll be looking at CaCO3, which is also known as calcium carbonate. And the only ink that we actually use this with would be the Matterroot ink, which is pictured on the bottom of this slide here. On the right half of this slide, you can see the progression of the Matterroot ink over a period of 2 weeks. And on the right-hand side of the slide, we can see the progression of Matterroot ink plus this compound over the same period. We can see, based on these two, that the additive does actually change the color of the ink a little bit. If you look at the top left print of the initial stain of the Matterroot, you can see that it is a dark purple. And if you look at the top left print of the initial stain of the Matterroot plus this compound, it is a slightly lighter hue of purple. So it does modify the color a bit. But as for the actual light fastness, seeing as there's only 2 weeks between the first and the final scan, we cannot really tell if it actually does affect the light fastness with this short time interval. That is something that will happen after we conduct more scans. On this slide, we'll be looking at citric acid, which has the molecular formula C6H8O7, and the inks that we printed with this with include the aronia berry ink and the elderberry ink, the aronia berry ink being on this slide. On the left-hand side right here, we have the progression of aronia berry ink over a period of 5 weeks, and on the right-hand side, we have the progression of the same ink plus this additive over the same period. I know it is difficult to see. It was a rather light ink to work with, but the top left print of the initial stain of the aronia berry is kind of a dull brown, a light reddish color. And if we look at the same print for the initial stain of the aronia berry plus this compound, it is a brighter red. So it does modify the color a bit. As for the longevity of the ink, it doesn't seem to affect it that much. Over this period, they both seem to fade the same amount. There's about the same amount of ink left on the paper after this period of 5 weeks. Next, we'll look at copper sulfate pentahydrate, and that has a molecular formula 5CuSO4.5H2O. And the ones that we use this with include the elderberry ink and the goldenrod ink. The one that's pictured on this slide is the goldenrod ink. Following linearity from the rest of the slides, the plain goldenrod ink is on the left. And unfortunately, we only have one stain of both of these since this is a relatively new compound that we have worked with for that long. And on the right-hand side, we have the goldenrod ink plus this compound. And the only thing that we can really determine is that it does modify the color. It may be hard to see, but the goldenrod ink is a light gold, whereas the goldenrod ink plus this compound is actually a light green. And of course, once again, this is something that would be able to determine the longevity of once we actually get more stains. Finally, we'll look at our final compound, which is sodium bicarbonate, which has the molecular formula NaHCO3, and this is also commonly known as baking soda. The two inks or the ink that's actually pictured on this slide is the elderberry ink, the other one that we printed with being the Matterroot. It does modify the color a bit. The elderberry ink, which is on the left right there, is actually a dark brown reddish color, whereas the elderberry ink plus the compound is going to be a dark green color. As for the actual longevity of the ink, this was taken over a period of 1 week, so we can't necessarily tell what the difference is in the longevity. However, I think it's important to point out that the progression of the elderberry ink plus this compound over the 1 week period, it changed from a dark green color to a light gold. And this is interesting because if changes in color ever did occur, they would happen over longer periods of time. So we'll look at our final question here. How does the type of paper used affect the light fastness of these natural inks? And to answer this, we'll look at 2 examples. The first example being the elderberry ink printed on the Origami Kosho Select, which is one of the more dense, heaviest papers that we worked with. And we'll also look at the elderberry ink printed on the Hitakata SH-16, which is one of the lighter papers that we worked with. And you can see this because the background kind of bleeds through the paper there on the bottom. Anyway, so in week 1, both of them were like a dark red, brownish color. And in week 7, they turned out to be a lighter orange. And they both kind of have the same content being on the paper there. So from this, we can basically conclude that the deterioration of ink is constant to each specific type of ink. The type of paper used doesn't really seem to affect the longevity of inks. And just as a summary, we'll go over these questions once more. What type of inks are most resistant to light? And as we had seen in the first couple of slides there, the inks derived from nuts and woods, including the black walnut, goldenrod, and like this last one here, madderwood, like that. Those ones tend to be a bit more resistant to light. They tend to be more light fast, whereas the inks derived from fruits and vegetables, including the aromaberry, elderberry, and onion, are not nearly as light fast and can be considered fugitive. And what type of additives are best to increase the longevity of the ink? And the only one that we have sufficient data for this for would be the citric acid. And of course, we saw with the aromaberry that it doesn't seem to significantly impact the longevity of the ink. Of course, with the other additives, this is something that we'll be able to observe over a longer period of time. What type of paper actually retains the pigmentation the best? This is kind of a trick question. We actually found from the last slide that the type of paper used doesn't really seem to affect the pigmentation of ink. The actual deterioration of ink seems to be constant, specific to each type of ink. And finally, as a closing note, I would like to thank my faculty mentor for allowing me to conduct this research, as well as the Iowa State University Foundation for funding this research in part. Thank you.
All right. David, we have a couple of minutes for questions. Any questions?
What were you most surprised about? Like when you talked about your initial thoughts, what were you most surprised about?
Since I thought that like the darkest types of ink would be more resistant to light, I was kind of surprised to see that it doesn't really matter, but it more so matters really just the material that it's derived from. I thought that was fun. Any other questions?
So I understand why variety use and kind of give a few
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
give a few and further the rest of them. I understand a wide variety of variations.
Right.
So,
It's not necessarily, I didn't have it on the slideshow, but the aronia or the elderberry plus the citric acid actually turned out to be like a bright pink color. There's one print that I kind of like the most, that's back at the printing studio, but I like that one the best. So.
Great, thank you. All right, next up, we've got Ian Meisch with Saving Iconic Architecture, Rehabilitation of the Lisbon Building in Los Angeles.
Good morning, everyone. It's my Ian Meisch. I'm a senior in design here at Iowa State, and my research program is saving and rehabilitation of the Lisbon Building in West Hollywood. So first, I'd like to acknowledge my project partners. The first was Saving Iconic Architecture out of Los Angeles, who worked directly with us for the preservation and providing some research as well as imagery, as well as the COD's Preservation and Cultural Heritage Program, which assisted us in our preservation techniques. This was also one of 4 projects that was selected by Saving Iconic Architecture to be presented at their annual event as an exemplary example of how you can save both historical, interior, and exterior elements while combining a new and innovative concept. So two of the most important research questions that I asked myself at the beginning of the process was first, how could the historical building be rehabilitated to get an innovative environment with economically viable solution that would allow the building to remain standing and reintegrate its community? And especially important because not only creating a historic concept that is preserved, but a concept that lasts for a period of time is essential in the rehabilitation process. And then second is how could the proposed interior design maintain historic integrity, character, design features while introducing a new use that appeals to West Hollywood audiences in a modern way. And this question is asked because with the rehabilitation process, we focus specifically on interior elements. So there's a wide variety of elements on the interior, such as the lighting, and historic furniture that we pay close attention to, because when a rehabilitation project is created, we want to pay attention to those elements for new innovative environment that ties back to historic elements. So some of the methods that we used for the research was first, It's historic structure report and community analysis. This allows us to look at things like the building's relevance to local history, how was it back when it was created in the 1960s, and what is its development today. The importance of the structure in the community, where the community ties what the building means to the community, and how it evolved. The important historical features of the structure, so that they character defines features of the structure that makes it relevant today. Then we create a concept study that looks at the needs of the community today, because the concept study really analyzes what best would fit the rehabilitation of this project, and then a concept that would last a long period of time, because you not only want to save the building, we want to ensure that the building safety extends for a period of time. That occurs through the integrated concept. And then the design concept is created to analyze important architectural features that you want to use. Interior elements such as lighting, furniture, art is referenced and recreated in this new space, and concept space planning that allows us to efficiently use the new interior space for our concept. And the final result is a completed environment that fits all key historical elements in a modernized and innovative concept that matches with all of our original key research plans. So for some historical background, the Lytton building was founded by Bartlett, but the Lytton savings was wrong. It was a unique building because not only was it a bank, but it also had an attached feature of the Lytton Center, which is a historical center in the 1960s that displayed a wide variety of art, sculptures. They had a theater, photography, basically it became a cultural hub for that West Hollywood area for around 10 years, and then they would fall into a financial ruin in the late 1960s, and then the cultural center was demolished. The bank building would remain, but it would be converted to a Chase Bank, and then eventually it ended in 2019. And then for some more historical relevance, these two photos show some historical photos of the Lytton building as it appeared in its prime in the 1960s. So the first identifies some important elements. The first is the accordion roof on top. It's one of the largest at this time in the country, and really creates a unique architectural feature that we really wanted to accent with the interior of the space. We also noticed that it's one of the last buildings of architect Kurt Fernmeyer, which is important because it has that architectural side from a famous 1960s modernist architect, and it has an immense opportunity for its unique shape and unique characteristic features to be rehabilitated in a unique way. And then we go into community analysis. So this allows us to really dive deep and look into what would best fit this project. So we look at the traffic, age groups of each percent of population in the areas in the 25 to 44 range, which shows that there's a young population living around the environments, and we want to take a concept that can really attend to that population. We see that West Hollywood has an influx of 3.59 million visitors each year. So we see that there's a great tourism industry that can support the new concept, and that generates about 1.7 billion in revenue each year. So we know that there's a market that invests in the area. And this kind of leads to conclusion to a variety of concepts, from a bookstore to a restaurant to an innovative community center, and ultimately decided on an art gallery with a restaurant conversion. And for this concept, we came to that conclusion because we looked around the art gallery area in 50-mile radius, and we noticed that Los Angeles is a very popular place for art. And so we wanted to create a space that in West Hollywood local artists could use to display the art, as well as a restaurant option to be that feature to ensure the concepts survive. And our final concept is a fresh environmental planning beauty park food and a drink element in a new innovative space that blends history with a modern take on what once was, enhancing an ambient experience that captivates you the moment you walk in. Featuring plastic materials such as Macassar woods and polished brass, you can highlight the retro designs in the modern blend. Ultimately, Lytton Galleries connects local artists with everyone from patrons to curious connoisseurs in space that everyone can enjoy. And now that we have a concept, we create a concept sketch to best envision of what the interior space could look like. So this is an art sketch that design. You see in the center, we want to feature this modern art space. You see areas on the side, and then we have stuff like black frames over the walls. Started mapping out what the best area of the art was. So this is a kind of fairly idea of what the interior space could look like. And then I created the final concept plan. So keeping with the original concept sketch that I had, we keep a centralized bar space that serves as a feature, as well as two seating areas on the side, and then two main galleries on the ground for the LA Modern Gallery. in the sculpture gallery. And then on the second floor, you have a walk around galleries that feature a wide variety of spaces from decor gallery to sculpture gallery, as well as another bar seating area for people to commune while they're walking around. And then an artist studio, because with the art gallery that features art from local artists, and they want to have a place that they can store their artwork as well as work, so they're not hauling artwork across long distances. And these are more historical interior photos that were referenced when I was looking at the interior design. Everything from furniture to lighting to the stained glass feature, which you see on the left, was referenced and kind of modernized in this new concept that I created. And then certain things such as elements. So in the main section, you have this casework that is furniture surrounds, and it was noted that that material was called Passar wood. So that wood was used in the modernized furniture design. And then here is another historical photo. This is a sculpture that was featured in the West Building. It served as one of the main sculptures that art enjoyed, and it sat there for a variety of years. So when looking at new and innovative concepts we had back in the 60s, we used sculpture as a reference point to create the bar design. And you'll see that in the next photo. This is a rendering of the exterior space and shows how the modernization of the space ties back into historical features. First, we have the sculpture of the middle bar design. You have the two seating areas on the left and right, the person designed furniture that features that historical wood that was used in the original space in the 1960s, as well as custom designed gallery benches that also feature that wood to really create this unique environment that would fit for the West Hollywood area. Here's a close-up of that bar space. Those bar stools also tie into the seating areas on the left and right for use of Passar wood, which again is a traditional wood used in the interior environment in the 1960s in the casework. So you really get a feel of how the different elements kind of tie in and get those in the 1960s while providing a modernized space. Then here's a view of that left seating area. Both these sofas were specially designed by myself for the space to really capture what I wanted to tie into the historical concept to a modernized area, and then featuring the 1960s design pattern rug that gives some of the artwork that was featured in the original. And now these two images show one of the most important features. So in the original building, on that right image, there was a large historical stained glass piece of art that was featured for a variety of years. In fact, it's there until 2019, and it served as a focal point for people when they were walking into the bank, back into the bank. So featuring that space in a unique way really highlights it. So you notice on the left is the concept sketch of how best to frame that environment. And what would be a good idea on what the best way to display that is in a unique way. And that was the solution to that. So I created a custom design frame, and it was on the top of the L frame, cast the chrome metal that gets close to the original building, and the subtle paint, again, tie back to the small details to the 60s. And then you notice the two custom design sofas in front. So it really gives this unique environment because it allows that stained glass piece to be revitalized into the space. And it's kind of a unique seating area that won't be found anywhere else. And then for the second floor, this is a view of the photography gallery and the view of the bar area. And you'll notice how the zigzag of the ceiling really allows for that natural light to come into the day. That really creates this unique environment. Not only accompanying the artwork, but accompanying the people that enjoy the second floor gallery. Now, one of the most interesting parts to work on was how to create a space that would also be functional at night. As LA and Hollywood have very famous nightlife, so creating a space that accompanies that environment is really important, especially for the spiral of the building long term. And for that, I analyzed a variety of lighting designs, a variety of different environments, different moods that could be created. And ultimately, the solution to that is in this next image. So at night, it can be turned into this nightclub feature where you can dim down the lights, change the lights, and it highlights the specialized lighting that was designed on the bar feature to kind of give that interesting, unique environment, as well as the historical lights that appeared in the 1960s that also changed to a bluish hue with flash with fires. So it really creates this unique environment that really isn't found anywhere else that ensures this product's viability and really ties in back to its historical roots. Lift guys. Thank you to Design State as well as my mentor, Diane. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Ian. We have a couple minutes for questions. Do y'all have any questions for Ian? Did you say the building is still standing or?
Yes,
Okay.
slated for demolition, but it's still
Okay.
standing now. A Frank Gehry project's gonna replace it, but the original proposal was to try and attempt to save it.
So is that a possibility or no?
Not anymore, but
No.
city slated for demolitions for the new Frank Gehry building.
Were there any renovation plans that you found during your research?
You need like other people's proposals?
Yeah, like, just like, maybe they had ideas for what to do with that space and it didn't work out or something.
So the original historic society LA attempted to save the building and get it landmark status, which didn't really develop enough. And so there really wasn't a whole lot of plans designating the building, considering Frank Gehry had planned to build a development right on top of it. So they really wanted to demolish the building in the first place, so no real concept was ever provided. Besides the one that was done within this video.
All right, thank you. Who are you?
Yeah.
No, what, are you Mia?
Yeah.
Oh, you too, okay. All right, next up, we've got Mia Tirik and Tanya Sharma from Architecture with Reimagining Urban Utopias, a global perspective on co-housing as a solution to urban sustainability. Just use the arrows to navigate.
Okay, hi, my name is Tanya Sharma.
And my name is Mia Tier. We are fifth-year architecture students and under the guidance of sustainability professor Andrea Wheeler, we conducted research on in the field of behavioral architecture.
Our research is based in reimagining urban utopias and is a global perspective on co-housing as a solution to urban sustainability.
Our research seeks to question how potentially certain communal land care practices seen within intentional communities could serve as a premise for 21st century urban environments and increase sustainability.
Yeah, our desire to envision a utopian environment is inevitable. However, historically, it has been shown that the capital needed in creating this paradoxical environment has been extremely resource intensive. For example, in 2017, a study showed that our building materials used in the construction industry has increased by 23-fold between the 1900s and 2010. Constituent left movement prioritizing sustainable development as a need to move forward, and ideally in a manner that focuses on creating an equal opportunity to success and a better quality of life for all.
Sustainable development refers to our ability to meet the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations to meet their own needs. Acknowledged as a global concern in 2015, all member states of the UN adopted 17 goals towards this crucial agenda aimed at achieving sustainability by 2030. This catalyzed the discussion of what role intentional communities could play within the sustainable agenda, but more importantly, what even are intentional communities?
The late 20th century's interest in egalitarianism and socialist ideologies gave rise to several forms of utopian experimentations that are still present in our United States contemporary society. The Foundation for Intentional Communities defines an intentional community as a group of people who have chosen to live together or share resources on the basis of shared values. Intentional communities today encompass all variations of communes, sustainable villages, co-living, co-housing, and sustainable communities. Nevertheless, even within each of these descriptions lies an underlying connotation as to what fosters and maintains their community lives within each of these groups.
For example, eco-villages are rooted in advancing sustainable technologies and promoting environmental regeneration. They can be described as full-scale human settlements that embrace a supportive human healthy lifestyle and can be successfully continued sustainably within the indefinite future. Today, eco-villages are comprised in over 114 different countries and are connected to the global eco-village network. A more specific definition that this network has come up with includes design through locally owned participatory processes and locally sourced materials within eco-villages. While most communal living models have existed for centuries, co-living is a relatively new concept that is made by and for a millennial generation that embraces social networking and relies on systems of collaboration. Co-living fundamentally is a cultural distinction, and it can include a diverse set of forms, including private ownership and rental to urban or rural.
Co-housing refers to a form of housing that integrates single-family dwellings around substantial common facilities and activities. First introduced in Denmark around the 1960s, this movement began to gain attention in the United States around 1990, with over 150 established communities, co-housing communities in the country by 2008. The physical characteristics of the co-housing community are intentionally designed to emphasize the balance between private ownership, shared resources, and community involvement as a means to address social, economic, and environmental sustainability. The American psychologist B.F. Skinner, whose book Walden Tube serves as an inspiration behind one of our case study communities, Twitter, mentions that a community is much more complex than a laboratory experiment in human behavior, but not simpler than the large-scale enterprises analyzed in political, science, economics, and other social disciplines. For this reason, it is especially helpful in studying the effects of social environment on human behavior, and in return, the relevance of that behavior in the maintenance and development of our community lifestyles.
Along with literature reviews, our primary research included conducting fieldwork within the intentional community of Acorn in the winter of 2020 through 2021. Acorn is Quinox's much younger sister community. Here we interviewed current residents and applying residents of Acorn and Twin Oaks on their experiences within living in these communities. We also participated in their building design processes, participated in weekly meetings, and helped out their primary source of income, their SESC business. Within the community and throughout our stay, we questioned and learned more about how transferable their methods of sustainability in these communities were to modern day urban environments. So we restate our question, how might attention to these certain communal land care practices seen with these communities provide a premise for community success within 21st century urban environments?
The author of the 7 American Utopias, Dolores Hayden, states that every group must achieve a balance between authority and participation, community and privacy, and uniqueness and replicability. These are crucial areas of political choice which lead to problems with physical design whenever any settlement is built. Our research uses these three categories as a framework to establish a relationship between the social organization of the industrial community group and their motivation towards leading a more sustainable lifestyle. So within this first category, hierarchical structures within a society have a huge influence on people's lives. Communities dissatisfied with their social structures are often less exasperated and helpless, as we know today. Our survey questions identified people's willingness to participate in their community's agenda as a result of a feeling of knowledge or understood in their community. Businesses documented at both Acorn Farm and Twin Oaks were of non-hierarchical structures and cooperative ownership, and members were required to maintain a 42-hour work week for a relatively moderately comfortable lifestyle. This is quite comparable to our typical lifestyle here, in that we work 40 hours a week in exchange for finances that pay for our physical environment around us. The main differentiating factor is that egalitarian communities take out the exchange of finances as a means to hold their land and resources in common. We note that not all practices in communities are directly transferable. Our research aims at identifying transferable methods to urban contexts. For example, an income sharing model that limits personal income is not relatable nor successful. On the other hand, an increased walkability rating within the community allowed members to personalize their work schedule and increase community interactions. A flexible work schedule and task list increase members' authority over their personal time while still allowing them to accommodate for a 42-hour work week. Sharing one resource amongst a larger group of people is inherently a lower impact action. However, some things are better left private. Studying a small social group helps establish practices that people are comfortable sharing their resources with. Some survey participants referred to this as the inherent efficiencies of communal living, but were unable to quantify the savings made from this. For example, communities have chosen to invest in composting toilets, allowing them to use waste from over 100 different people as fertilizer on their on-site farming practices. Another efficiency was communal dining, wherein members volunteered to cook for the whole group about 2 to 4 times a week. Each person lived in dorm style, about 12-foot by 12-foot private rooms, apart from which all infrastructure was maintained for work and social interaction. They also shared bikes and cars as transport. Twin Oaks community had 5 cars for every driving member, while the ratio at Acorn was 4 cars for every driving member. While the average American household has more cars than driving members in each household. With increased ride sharing and social sustainability between members, both communities seem to have a much lower carbon footprint than the average American household.
Uniqueness and replicability meaning to refer to the standardization or adaptation of building techniques, hierarchical structures, and social culture that vary between community and community. Uniqueness is emphasized over replicability in most communes these days. However, it does not solely result from the complexity and expense, but rather simplification and standardization of techniques. Building materials are used as a way to express uniqueness. Thus, adaptive reuse and locally sourced salvage materials help ensure that a commune's building efforts will be unique and sustainable in result. But they also lead to replicable built styles that can fit and be used to inspire other groups of similar ideologies. At Acorn, the main residency where visitors and applying members would stay was made of cop. This building technique is a replication of building techniques popularized in the Pacific Northwest by other intentional communities. As it is only constructed of a mixture of straw bale and clay and earth, the method of construction and materiality are extremely sustainable. Though replicable, the design is actually extremely unique and specific to the community, as each member is able to hand mold and interact with their own built environment, thus creating their own sculptural work. Though many aspects of Acorn are based off its elder community, Twin Oaks, The community sizes make for using replicability in terms of housing standards very difficult. Twin Oaks has 75 members, while Acorn only has 25 to 30. Buildings at Acorn site sit much closer today than those in Twin Oaks. And in fact, socially and physically, Acorners are much closer. Their community plan cannot be replicated. Though the use of uniqueness and replicability structures within communities aim to support social action and not define it. So how can we use these communal experiences to transfer these concepts within a larger scale? Early models of co-housing in the United States was first seen within intentional communities. And architects McCammon and Durant redefined urban co-housing in the United States through their field work in 46 different communities in Denmark between the years of 1984 and 1985. They say it is important to note that co-housing is not the intentional communities or communes we know in the United States, which are sometimes organized around ideological beliefs and may depend on a charismatic leader. Many intentional communities function as educational or spiritual centers. Co-housing, on the other hand, offers a new approach to housing rather than a new way of life.
The architects distinguish this co-housing by 6 main features, which include participatory processes, intentional neighborhood design, extensive common facilities, complete resident management, non-hierarchical structures, and separate income sources. The model emphasizes privacy, private income, and public space, along with co-working and socializing, and is quickly spreading to urban environments. However, research on successful co-housing typologies within the United States is still very limited. And while McCammon and Durant present a vast repertoire for us to access within the area of sustainable housing, there is an imperative for more contextual and local perceptions of this movement.
Inherently, intentional communities and co-housing lifestyles are more sustainable because of their egalitarian roots. And many of these concepts that we have discussed today are transferable in a much larger scale urban environment.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions. I guess you're. Yeah, okay, all right. So, sorry.
That's fine.
All right, while the presentation is loading, next up we have Kyle.
Oh.
Oh, are you not presenting?
No.
Oh, who is king? Ah, okay, next one. We've got, is it Kyle?
Hi.
Kyle King and Jacob Gasper
Yes.
from Architecture with Architectural Clay Formworks, sorry.
No, you're good.
All right. Although Formworks also sounds interesting. I think while this is loading, you can go ahead and introduce yourselves and
Okay, yeah,
title.
my name is Jacob Gasper, and I'm Kyle King. We're both fifth-year Bachelor of Architecture students at Iowa State, and we're both currently employed in the Architectural Robotics Lab on the second floor of the Innovation Center. And our research over the past year is entitled Architectural Clay Formworks with our advisor, Shelby Doyle.
Ah. Okay. You can use the arrows to advance between slides.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Maybe. There we go.
So, okay, like we were saying, this is Architectural Clay Formworks.
In the first few months of 2020, we were sent home from our study abroad trip. We lost a summer internship in Rome, and we faced an uncertain future graduating into a post-pandemic economy. This project began in this odd in-between time while employed at the ISU Competition and Construction Lab during the summer of 2020. Founded in 2016 by Shelby Doyle, Nick Sensky, and Leslie Forgan, the ISU Computation and Construction Lab, or the CCL, is an initiative that works to connect developments and computation to the challenges of construction through teaching, research, publication, and exhibition. Architectural clay formwork is a body of work exploring the possibilities of 3D printing clay as formwork for concrete applications. This project began with a literature review and case studies to scope a research agenda and expand upon the possibility of 3D printing clay for the design and production of reusable concrete formwork. This research develops methods for unfired clay 3D printing, both for its geometric possibilities and limitations of the reusable architectural formwork. The hypothesis of this project is that clay can be 3D printed to produce a reusable mold for casted concrete while transferring its unpredictable textures. And a special thanks to the people listed below: Shelby Doyle, our advisor, Aaron Hunt, Nick Sensky, Lamont Tinkernet, Jasmine Buell, May Murphy, Kevin Wahlberg, and Mary Reed. So this line of thought started in the fall of 2020 and into the digital fabrication with Shelby Doyle. Here are some initial tests. These are 6 inches tall of clay prints that were done on the PotterBot, and then their corresponding casts with Rockite expansion cement on the right. And so you can see the different parametric designs, but also the different inaccuracies are overlaid into the corresponding concrete cast. And so then we also started to stack these, and so we started to imagine what a larger concrete architectural element could be with clay formwork. This is our clay extruding assembly. This assembly is inspired by Cornell Associate Professor Jenny Saban's clay non-woven project. And as you can see with the listed hardware, we have composed a more economically feasible solution to this clay extrusion mechanism through local hardware found at Lowe's. Unlike Jenny Saban's work at Cornell, we are unable to attach our extruding mechanism to the KUKA robotic arm itself, so therefore we have to compose a separate solution. From left to right, we initially tested horizontally laying the extruding mechanism along the same table as the KUKA industrial robot arm. We found this difficult as working against gravity, providing a longer distance for the compressed air to travel through the tube and up to the robotic arm. So next we flip the extrusion machine to a vertical assembly, therefore working with gravity. However, the distance from the end of the extrusion mechanism to the tip of the end of the end effector on the KUKA robot arm still poised to be too long for the compressed air. And lastly, we composed this custom stand that vertically aligned the KUKA, or vertically aligned the extrusion mechanism with the KUKA robotic arm to shorten that distance and provide a more efficient print. So these are some of the examples of what I was talking about with our end effectors. So starting from left to right, this is actually what's holding the nozzle that prints the clay. So the two on the left, it focused on holding the tube, but this didn't keep the bottom part parallel and perpendicular to the printing surface. So instead, we started making much larger tools to hold the entire assembly, so we have a more reliable print. And these are all printed using a 3D printer and utilized elements. So these are some of our initial first extrusions. So as you can see, there's different size clumps and beads. And so corresponding to the PSI that we use from the air compressor, a much higher PSI, so 50 to 60, will result in some of the much larger beads and trails of clay. But also the much smaller PSI will result in a much smaller bead and PSI. These are examples of our initial cylindrical tests. As you can see, testing different viscosities of clay that Jacob has mentioned, while also working with parameters of robot speed and layer height. And
because we're using pressurized air, we have to use a much softer clay, which you can see is only able to go so high. So that's what a lot of these initial cylindrical tests were testing.
These are annotations from our numerous tests and dissecting the magnitude of all the variables that are composed in every test. Those being, as I mentioned, layer height, PSI, the clay ratio itself, water to clay powder, and robot printing speed. So we began to kind of pinpoint the perfect algorithm for the tallest print.
So in some of those initial clay tests that they're talking about with so many variables, there's a lot of instances where it could go wrong. So like on the left, when I was talking about the clay is too watery, the entire print could just collapse. The next one, because we're using PSI and compressed air, there's a lot of points where if there's any air pockets in the clay, it'll explode and it'll actually ruin the print that we've had. And then clay being clay, it will move and bend and kind of slump as we're going. And these are just two pictures or examples of when our entire clay extrusion system exploded all over the walls. And so working with compressed air, this is something that we have to continuously work with.
So working with this dynamic of the right consistency of clay along with structure, we came up with the structural component of lattice, which actually helps stabilize the cylindrical print itself. So here are multiple tests where we're testing the number of these triangles or lattice points to successfully grow the largest cylinder possible. And as you can tell, with the more triangular points requires more clay. So try to find the most efficient code to print the tallest with the less amount of clay. And here's kind of the 4 points of our initial cast. You can see with the print. Then we let that print dry for 1 to 2 days to reach a leather hard state. At this leather hard state, the clay is both hard enough to resist the water from the concrete while being soft enough to not be too fragile for the concrete to break the cast. Once that concrete has dried for another 1 to 2 days, we were able to remove this dried clay formwork by just kind of chipping it off. And as you can see in this final completed cast of our initial studies, you can start to see some of the undulation that the algorithm kind of does when it pushes the lattice of the clay through the cylinder, interior of the cylinder.
Little too. Well, I think the issue is any of the outputs.
So our entire play workflow takes place in three different buildings on Iowa State's campus. The College of Design, the Communications Building, and then this building, the Student Innovation Center. So usually we start at the College of Design, we pick up any materials that we ordered or any clay that we're getting, and then we usually cart all of that over to the CCL and the Communications Building, which is where we do most of our work. In that building, we mix the clay, we plug the clay into the tube, and then we get any tools that we need, and then we usually cart it all the way over to the Student Innovation Center, this building, and up to the second floor of the Architectural Robotics Lab, which is where we actually do all of our printing. And then because we can't cast concrete in this building, we cart our formworks back to the Communications Building and do all of the other work. So utilizing this workflow and all these variables, we started the construction of a 6-foot column using entirely clay for the concrete formwork. And so we did this in modules. So these are the 16 lattice modules that we printed and used to construct our final column. As you can see, they all use the same parameters. They're all 10 inches in diameter, and they all have 6 points lattice to hold it into the circle. But as Kyle will talk about next, they differ in a lot of ways.
So this diagram shows the time frame of the chronological order of our columns, modules that we casted. And as you can see, the discrepancies are most evident in height. This kind of shows while we use the same variables or same ratio of clay, there had to be continuous adjustments of the PSI, printing speed, and etc. So there would be some days that we would have more successful prints and taller prints, while there would be other days where there would be lesser prints or shorter prints just based on the variables.
Okay, this is a video. It's not okay. So this is so we cast into them. So this is a video of us casting into the clay formworks, and then after the clay and the concrete are dry, they're easily chipped away from and then revealing the final cast. So yeah, these are the final modules that we're taking from those clay formworks on that slide a few minutes ago. Okay. So these are the corresponding casts with their corresponding formwork. So you can see how all the discrepancies in the clay formwork, like those initial tests at the beginning, transfer themselves into the cast, kind of giving them different textures and heights.
Again, a dissection of the variables for each print and their corresponding cast.
Okay, this is the final column and all the modules stacked up. And then this is the final column featured in the 2021 College Design Variables show.
In conclusion, this research challenges the current conceptions of digital fabrication and its inherent perceptions of perfection. With this collaboration of robotic software and constructed variables with the malleability of clay as material, a new awareness of fabricated aesthetics is assumed. Clay being an unreliable material, resistible to gravity, provides human touch and manipulation. Our project explores these clay limitations and chooses to rather celebrate them as a new digitally fabricated aesthetic.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
We do not have time for questions. All right, while I'm loading the PowerPoint, next up we have Grace Estenson from Graphic Design and Marketing. Yep. Can you use the arrows to navigate more stuff? This one? Yep, sweet.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Grace Estenson. I'm a freshman here at Iowa State University, studying in both the College of Design and Iowa College of Business. My mentor, Berlin Bianco, who's here with me. She is in the Art and Visual Culture Department within the College of Design. She focuses primarily in printmaking. The title of our research project is 3D printing applications for letterpress printing. So before I dive into our research, I'm just going to give you a quick history of the letterpress printer, and it will include some important terminology that I will be using throughout this presentation. So the letterpress printer most notably gained momentum in the mid-15th century when a German inventor by the name of Johannes Gutenberg, shown up there on the slide, introduced movable type on the letterpress in Europe, which drastically changed the efficiency of the printing process, ultimately making the mass production of books and other printed material possible. An especially notable example of this was through the mass production and distribution of the Bible, significantly aiding in the spread of religion throughout Europe and beyond. We have a picture of the sample text from one of Gutenberg's many Bibles that he printed. So the letterpress played a huge role in shaping how people consumed information, and it paved the way for printed communication for millennials to come. The photo in the middle there is of a printing press from 1811 to give you guys some sort of idea of what a printing press, an older printing press looks like. The one we used for this project. Okay. Oh. Okay, there we go. Can best be seen in the photo on the right there, a little smaller and a little more modern. So letterpress printing works by first having an area of raised text or imagery, as in the photo on the left there. This is known as a matrix or a matrice for plural. That's a traditional one there on the left. And then these matrices must be a very specific height of 0.918 inches. So these matrices are placed on the bed of the letterpress printer. Ink is then applied to that raised surface via a text or an image. Paper is placed at the top of that inked surface, and then it is printed through the letterpress where the paper is pressed into the ink surface, kind of like a big old stamp. So depending on the level of pressure, these matrices may also leave an emboss on the paper along with the ink itself. So while modern times don't really require us to use the letterpress printer for any applications, they are still used widely in fine art applications. So historically, wood or lead would be the main material used in these matrices, but oftentimes these materials would break down over time. So this is kind of where our research comes in. So the goals of our research, we first wanted to determine if using a 3D printer to create matrices for a letterpress printer was even a viable option. And then if so, we wanted to determine which combinations of variations within the 3D printing process produced both a lasting matrix and a process that maximized efficiency. So ultimately, if we found that using a 3D printer was a viable option for the letterpress, we wanted our process to be very user-friendly, a process that could be picked up by a student even if they had no previous knowledge with 3D printing or the 3D printing software. And then lastly, we wanted to put these matrices under various amounts of pressure to see if or when they break down. So in order to accomplish these goals, we printed a 1 inch by 1 inch capital letter A in the typeface phosphate as seen up there, using different variations within the 3D printing process. We couldn't quite test all the possibilities within the 3D printing process and software, but I will go over the main variables we tested. One of the variables we kept constant is the infill density. This refers to how much material gets put inside of whatever you're 3D printing. We use an infill density of 20%, which is a low infill density. Jumping into the variables, we did test. So for those of you unfamiliar with 3D printing, 3D printers work by layering different types of materials, primarily plastics or types of plastics and then biomaterials. For this research, we investigated 3 different types of materials, which included PLA, ABS, and nylon. And conveniently, in our case, each of these were different colors. So the PLA is going to be the transparent A blocks. The ABS is going to be the white, and the nylon is going to be the black. And so the ABS is going to be the strongest of those 3 materials, with the PLA being just a little bit more flexible than that one, and then the nylon being the most flexible of the 3 materials. So as I mentioned earlier, 3D printing works in a layering method, which can kind of be shown here better than I could ever explain. So one of the other variables we tested is print quality, and print quality refers to how thick of like each of these layers is. So a thinner layers indicating like more detail, which means a higher quality print. Print quality has a lot of impact on how much time these take to print. So for reference, the estimated time to print a low quality A block in the PLA is approximately 21 minutes, whereas when printed at ultra quality, that had an estimated time of 3 hours and 3 minutes. So quite a big difference. So we wanted to investigate whether there were a large difference between the prints when printed at low quality versus those at high quality to see if it would ever be worth the time it takes to print an ultra quality option. So we also printed A blocks in 2 different types of orientations, vertically and horizontally. You can kind of see here how the printer constructs each of these a little bit differently. Most notable with the horizontally built one, that one required some support structures to be built in order for the A to be constructed. The last variable we tested was the type of file or the type of software we used. So we primarily used a printing, 3D printing software called Rhinoceros, or Rhino for short. Rhino saves its files as STLs, which means that the file is saved as a 3D model. The other software we use is the Dremel Digilab 3D software, 3D slicer, sorry. This software is a little less advanced than the Rhino software. It reads grayscale images, you input, and then returns a 3D model of that file based on how you set the software to read black, white, and then therefore the grays in between. These files were saved and printed as JPEGs. So in total, we printed 12 blocks in the PLA, 12 in the ABS, and then 10 in the nylon because the option, well, the print quality of ultra quality wasn't an option when working with the nylon. So for each material, we printed both a vertically built block and a horizontally built block for each of the 5 print quality options, with the exception of the ultra quality for the nylon. And these were all created using the Rhino software. We also printed 2 vertically constructed A blocks that each material made using the Dremel Digilab 3D slicer software, which were the grayscale JPEG files. So one of the JPEG files there had smoothing applied to it and the other did not. Additionally, it's important to note that sometimes a 3D printer would make some mistakes, if you will. The base of the 3D blocks would oftentimes flare out at the bottom. And then also for the horizontally constructed ones, sometimes the supports weren't 100% effective, which meant that additional craftsmanship was required. Additionally, the nylon sometimes didn't cooperate 100% with the 3D printer, resulting in some pretty distorted A blocks in there at the bottom. So once we finished printing, using the 3D printer, we were ready to begin printing with the ladder press. So as of right now, we've only begun printing the vertically constructed A blocks that were made with the Rhino software. This is kind of how we set up those to be printed. And then that top over there is our first kind of sample print. It's actually 2 prints we had to run through twice because the initial print we got was very light. And the second one was as well. You can see one of the nylon blocks appeared semi-decent, but we decided then that we needed some additional padding to help increase the pressure between the blocks and the printer to get a more defined print. So that padding you can see in that bottom right photo there. So this is our first official print here. The labels at the top correspond with the PLA and ABS, low quality, medium quality, high quality, ultra quality, and then the high speed option. And then those bottom labels are going to correspond with the row for the nylon, since there was, again, no ultra quality option for the nylon. So for this one, we padded it with 1 offset blanket, a piece of Titanium paper, 1 draw sheet, and then printed it on Strathmore 400. Still not quite satisfied. We added an additional draw sheet with the second print there. And then an additional draw sheet for the third print there. And then on the fourth one, we added a piece of Strathmore 300 as padding. And then still not satisfied, we went to print number 5, where we found, we kind of thought this was the best padding. It was just right. Had an offset blanket, Titanium, 3 draw sheets, and then 1 piece of Strathmore 400, and this one's printed on Strathmore 300, which is just a little bit thinner than the Strathmore 400, a little lighter weight paper. So we ended up printing this combination of padding an additional 50 times, making for 55 total prints. One of our research goals was to determine if or when these matrices break down. So none of these matrices broke during this run through. But we did notice some slight changes within the texture of the A's as we printed more and more, indicating that the A blocks were maybe being flattened as they were run through the letterpress printer more and more. So we decided to put them under more pressure by looking at the emboss. So this here is without the ink, a run through with the same padding as the last one with just one additional sheet of padding. And then we wanted to see if we could get them to break or flatten more significantly, and also observe the emboss as well. So I was able to get up to 9 sheets of additional padding before I was no longer able to crank all that paper through the letterpress, even with my whole body weight. So just noticing a difference between these two slides, definitely noticeable. But like the ink one, we weren't able to get them to break, but we were able to get them significantly flatter. So moving forward with this research, we plan to continue printing the A blocks that we have not yet got to print both on the letterpress, which includes the JPEG files, and the horizontally built A's. After that, once we can look at this stage of printing as a whole, we plan to print this 5" by 7" orange graphic that I made in the 3D printer in what we believe to be the best combinations of variations within the printing software and process to figure out if we can get the 3D printer to print that effectively enough to be transferred well onto paper when you send it through the letterpress. And yeah, so far it seems like this is a viable option to print matrices, but I am interested to see how well the 3D printer does with a design, a graphic like this that has a little bit more detail on the inside to see if that can be effectively transferred. So yeah, thank you. I don't think we have time for questions.
We do not have time for questions. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Last but not least. All right, next up, we've got Delaney Kennedy with A Forgotten Avant-Garde from Art and Design. And you can use the arrows to share the reflex.
Hello, so my name is Diane Parker. I'm the senior department of art and design as well as culture. My faculty mentor is Dr. Connolly in the art and design arts and cultures department in the College of Design. My research is on Cloverdale's 1988 sculpture Queen. So some brief background is art history, specifically what I did was looking at how artists convey how they saw themselves as well as the world in their art. Some terminology that will be used is avant-garde, which refers to the unusual experimental ideas, and then some essential art pieces that will be discussed more within the lecture. Biomorphic form is when you have artworks, specifically abstract form that reflects organic or body parts in the work. You have feminism, specifically second-wave feminism, which was the push for gender equality, and then the period I, which was a term coined by art historian Baxendall, who used it to connote how the culture that the art was in affected its creation. So methodology is some guidelines for the research that we have to be able to physically go and see the art, which is important because how you experience it in person, where if you see it in an image, it's very different. So I mainly looked at artworks that were available either here on campus or in the area. So I selected 20 because I actually saw this piece earlier when I was doing an internship at a gallery in downtown Des Moines, Stephen Dale Fine Arts Gallery. So it always kind of intrigued me when learning more about her while discussing with the owner of the gallery who wants to do more research. So this was an opportunity to do so. So then the second aspect of the research is learning more about her as a person, such as where she was born, where she's from, as well as learning more about the art piece itself, such as what is the measure, which is about 11 and a half or 12 and a half by 7 inches, and learning what it's made out of, such as the acrylic modeling paste, paint, canvas, and wood. It's composed of 2 pieces on the base. And then it's seeing like the influence of seeing how her relationships either with her family, friends, or people she interacted with affected the creation of the art, as well as the time period it was made and the art styles that were looking before and during the time it was made influenced how she created the art. So some background context is understanding her as a person. So she was born in 1939 Switzerland. However, she grew up in France. Her father wanted to look at the bottom between was a surrealist artist as well as Dadaist artist, but surrealism came to be more influential with her, especially with her interest in abstract expressionism, since abstract expressionists were very interested in how surrealists were influencing exploring the mind in their work. You also have her mother, Kay Boyle, who was located to be very right, who was a feminist writer, and how she would use her writing pieces to subvert gender norms, such as using the terminology soft so often kind of used it lost in its feminist connotation, female connotation. There's also Peggy Guggenheim, which was Lawrence Gale's first wife, and he actually was able to display his works at good galleries, such as Art in the Century of New York City, where Jackson Pollock's work was also seen. So Cloverdale being able to go see her father's work as well as Jackson Pollock's further used her connection to abstract expressionism. So abstract expressionism emerged in the early 20th century, specifically the 1940s and 1950s, and was purely a narrative art form, meaning it was not imported over. So, Impressionism originated in Europe, and then, the United States. So here it was originated in the United States, and artists were really interested in expressing themselves in their works and having the artwork as well as express the mind that created it. The Cloverdale was very influenced by abstract expressionism, specifically some of the artists she was influenced to, at least John Chamberlain, his piece of which James looked at the bottom, and he showed her how crevices and deep colors can be used in art. The Cloverdale piece has crevices where it's comprised of 2 pieces, but within those 2 pieces, it's comprised of 2 chambers, where the first chamber seems to have the second chamber go out of it. So it's showing kind of how you don't get to see the entire piece. There's crevices where you can have to walk around inside. We also have Elaine Hume, whose piece Flores is located at the very top. And she used fragmentation, which was also used by William de Puy, her husband, who's also influential in Cloverdale, where she used light and dark colors to contrast. Her husband, William de Puy, was influential to Dale also, because he used fragmentation as a way to show how his piece weren't one unified work. And Cloverdale does that, where how she uses strips of canvas to create her piece, as well as how there's an influence of William de Puy, where she uses bright colors to help show how it's not one piece, but rather multiple fragmentation. It's also understanding and looking at abstract expression, because it was purely the narrative art form, also observing the title of the piece, which is 20. So it's also seeing how it is similar to how it sounds like Mark Twain, who is a well-known American writer. And what I found on him during my research is that he was a supporter of gender equality, so he supported the suffragettes when they were doing their movement. It's also understanding that Twain is also a term that refers to a pair of 2. And the sculpture is composed of 2 pieces, and when you first look at it, it looks like a pair of shoes, which is a subject that was used by pop art. Pop art came after abstract expressionism. It was from roughly the mid-1950s to the 1960s. So my professor gave me the information on bronze baby shoes, which I did not know thing. So it was where mothers would take their child's first shoes and bronze them as a way to commemorate their first steps. However, when looking at Twain, it's a bit larger than baby shoes. It's more the size of a woman's shoe, an adult shoe. And when first observing Twain in person, the picture don't do it justice. It looks a bit ratty, for lack of a better term. So it's showing how it's moralizing the work done by women in the efforts they've done to push for gender equality. So shoes have been used by pop artists. I've seen with Andy Warhol's piece at the bottom, which is titled shoes, and was made in 1980s. This is a print of women's high heel shoes. So pop artists would use mundane projects to critique the time period they were living in. So Twain uses this, which is also, the using mundane shoes is also used by feminist artists as a way in the social and biological context. Post-minimalism was where you really saw it become pretty niche for female artists, especially because the movement rebelled against industrial materials being used, and they would use what was being soft materials, getting this feminine connotation. So artists that really influenced Hilda Vale from the Bendis, I found, how she transformed energy of sexual painting into a process-based culture that is expressive for the physical self. Hilda Vale does it as well, where you get more of the aesthetic cues, which Linda Bendis used, which Vale applies to the piece Twain. However, it's also looking at the social context that was going on during this time. We had art historian and activist Lucy Leiper, who is pictured at the bottom, where she urged artists to use social and biological concerns into their minimalist forms. So this is where you really see a second wave feminism coming, also emerged during the 1950s and 70s